No.
Okay. All right. Okay. The Year of Learning by Dr. Paul Koningsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Lebish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nissen Hara Nissen ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Medea bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avramea ben Shimon, and Cheryl Scher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva, Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel ben Harav Shimon. A month of learning sponsored by Haran and Mel Haller, in memory of her mother, Malka Rachel Bas Yehuda Leib. Today is the 12th, and it's a day of learning sponsored by Ruth and Ed Goldberg, in memory of her mother, Shanda Bat Mordechai. And the Shemas have an Aliyah, Kranka Rafia, Velti Yeshir, Hashem Matzliah, L'chol B'nai Yisrael, a good Gaben Shtiar.
Okay.
Okay. All right. There's Zev. Good. All right. Hopefully Ted will be able to join us. Mendy. Good. Okay. I was looking over the beginning of the Nun Bet yesterday as a part of a preparation, and I just wanted to go back over that part a little bit and then continue on the rest of the Amud. Okay, so if we could jump back to the bottom actually of Nun Aleph, Amud Beis. Okay, Amar le Rav Safra, towards the bottom of the Amud next to the last line. Okay. Right, so we were saying basically, again, a variety of minhagim, okay, in different places, right? And the implication being that one should not practice a different minhag, okay, because that's going to lead to discord. And so following that, Rav Safra says to Rabbi Abba, Kigon Anan, as in the case, he says, with us, the Yad'inin B'Kaviyah Diyarcha. We know when the new month was established. Now, let's come back and understand we're talking about Bavel during the time when they already have Yom Tov Sheni. Okay, and so therefore, he's saying Bi Yishuv Lo, that basically, okay, that any kind of work on Yom Tov Sheni, okay, is forbidden. Okay, that's the point. And here, Avidna, okay, Mipnei Shinui Machloket, Lo Avina, we don't do work on Yom Tov Sheni, okay, why? Again, reflecting the difference between Eretz Yisrael and Bavel, right? Because it's going to lead to discord. Bamidbar Mai, but in the environs, in the outer areas, not in the communities, right? Amarle, what's the situation there? Amarle, he responded, Hachi Amar Rabbi Rav Ami, this is what Rav Ami said, B'yishuv Asur B'midbar Mutar. Okay? Implying that in the inhabited parts, it's forbidden, but in the deserted, okay, if I can use that term for the moment, okay, areas, it's permitted. Okay, in other words, if they don't know when the new month was established, okay, for sure, then it's understandable that they may not know that that was the second day of Yontif, where work is forbidden. Okay. Now, that's where we left yesterday. And we pick up Rav Natan bar Asya. Okay. So we have a story now that's reflecting this issue of Yom Tov Sheni. And that's where it connects. Okay. So Rav Natan bar Asya, Azal Mebe Rav Lepompadita. He walked, we assume, the distance from the house of Rav, the academy of Rav, to Pompadita, B'Yom Tov Sheni Shel Atzeret, on the second day of Yontov of Shavuot. Okay, what did they do? Shamte Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef put him in a ban. All right. Reason I use ban as there apparently were different levels. Either there's ban, there's excommunication, so on and so forth. Okay, so think of a ban as the fact that a rule where colleagues were to have nothing to do with the person. Okay, a lower level, okay, as opposed to excommunication, which would be almost not allowing him into a shul or into a community or things like that. Amarle Abai. So Abai raises the question, why did you do that? Ulanegde mar negide. So let the master then require of him lashes, flogging him. In other words, give him malchus instead. So this is going to lead us to an interesting point as to which is the more severe punishment.
Right.
Okay? Amarle, so he said to him, Rav Yosef responded to Abai, Adifa avde le. I did what is preferable to him. In other words, what's more beneficial? Okay, what's the more stringent? Are you going to say the physical punishment of Malchus is more stringent? Or are we going to say that the social distancing, and I use that term that we can identify with it, okay? Lack of interaction with the community, is that more stringent? So the Gemara goes on to tell us, the Ma'arava, that in the West, namely in Eretz Yisrael, Mimi no anagde de barbe rav, okay, that they established the punishment as flogging, even for a Talmid Chacham, okay, velo mimi no ashamta, but they don't assign on him this ban, okay, so that would seem to imply, okay, that at Eretz Yisrael, that flogging would be the greater punishment under such circumstances. Now, Ika da Amre, and there are those who say, Nagde Rav Yosef, that Rav Yosef had him flogged. Amarle Abaye, Nishmate. And Abaye instead suggests that he puts him in a ban. Okay, right? And that's Amarle Abaye, Nishmate Mar. The Rav Ushmuel, the Amre Travayu, that both Rav and Shmuel together they say, Minadin al Shnei Yamim Tovim Shel Galiyot, that we put somebody in Nidui, in excommunication, okay, if they are transgress the issue of the second day of Yontif in the diaspora. Amarle, so Rav Yosef replies, in this second lashon, the Ika da Amre, right? Hani mili imish da alma. That refers to the average person. Hachat surba midrabananhu. But here he's a Talmid Chacham. He's one of the students of the rabbis. The Tavale Avde. That we did that which was, in a sense, better for him, right? The B'ma'arava minmo an gadata, the bar be'rav, because in Eretz Yisrael, they would flog, students of the Rav, in other words, of the academy. In other words, we know that clearly if there was a Rav who rendered a psak that was considered mered, considered a situation of rebellion, the punishment was that he was publicly flogged. Velo mimino ashamta, and that they did not put a ban on him. So Gemara now tells us the following as we move on to another part of the Mishnah. Kiotsebo hamolich perot shvi'it v'chule. And similarly, we said, in a situation where one transports produce of shvi'is, right, of the sabbatical year, and brings it to a place. So the implication is, when he brings it, if he brought it from a place where it's still in the field to a second place where it's no longer in the field, or vice versa, bringing it from a place where it ended in the field, it ceased to be in the field, to a place where it still continues that produce to be in the field. That was what the Mishnah was saying. So now we continue. Velid leila Rabbi Yehuda. And are we saying then that Rabbi Yehuda does not hold by what was taught, the T'nan in the Mishnah, Notnim alav chomrei hamakom sheyatza misham v'chomrei hamakom shehalach l'sham? That Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold by this statement in the Mishnah that we place upon him the stringencies of the location from which he came, as well as the stringencies of the place to which he arrives. Amar Rav Shisha, Bered the Rav Idi, says Rav Shisha in the name of Rav Idi, Milta Achrite Ka'amar Rabbi Yehuda. Now Rabbi Yehuda was really saying something else. Vahachi Ka'amar. And this was what he meant to say. O mimakom shelo kalu. Either from a place where the shvi's produce had not ceased, lemakom shelo kalu, to another place where where it did not cease. Vishama shakalu bimkomo, and then he learned or heard, but learned that it did cease in his place. Chayav leva'er, that then he has a responsibility to remove it, to destroy it. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, in this case, Rabbi Yehuda is saying, say, v'havelach afata mehecha da'atainu. You have to go and, in a sense, go back to the place from where you took it and remove it there. Bahalo kalu laho, says the Gemara. But here, if it didn't cease, from where he took it, the Memra, does that come to tell us the Rabbi Yehuda, the Kula Ka'amar, that Rabbi Yehuda was therefore teaching us a leniency, implying that he didn't have to go back to the place from whence it came to remove it, but he could remove it then and there at that place. So the Gemara then tells us, Va'amar Rabbi Elazar, Lo amar Rabbi Yehuda, Ele lechumra. But wasn't it Rabbi Elazar who told us that Rabbi Yehuda made his statement as a stringency? So if that's the case, says the Gemara, Ele ipuch, then you must reverse the language. Eino chayav leva'er, that in that case, maybe he, so long as it still hadn't ceased in the place from which he came, if that's the case, he should not have to destroy it. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, and therefore Rabbi Yehuda is saying, say v'havelach af ata mehecha da'atayu. Okay, go back and bring it back to the place from which you brought it. V'hakalu laho, and where it ceased for them, okay, in that place. So that would be the stringency, that even in the place, if he brought it to a place where it hadn't ceased, but it had ceased from his original location, he would have to go back to the original location to destroy it, to remove it. That would therefore be a stringency. Now, Abaye Amar, says Abaye, Le'olam kedekatani. Abaye disagrees and says, no, it's the way it was taught in our Mishnah. V'hachi kamar. And this is what it means to tell us. O b'makom shelo kalu, either from a place where it hadn't ceased, l'makom shekalu, to a place where shvi produce had ceased. Okay. What happens? V'hechziran l'makoman, and he brought it back to its place. V'adayin lo chalu, and it still hadn't ceased. Eino chayav leva'er. Then in that situation, he does not have to destroy it. Rabbi Yehuda, that would be Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, however, says, Tsei v'havelach, that you have to go and bring it back. Af ata mehecha da'atainu, even to the place from which you brought it. V'hakalu laho, and there, because it ceased being there, or ceased to them. In other words, to the residents, to the people there. Now, Matkifla Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi challenged this and said as follows. The Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, Atu Agaba de Chamra Kaltinhu. Okay. He says to them, what are you, since at what point do we say that it's on the back of the donkey that the fruit was absorbed? In other words, trying to make an impression that if you say that it was no longer in existence in that original place, okay, why really do you have to go back to return it, to remove it there? Why couldn't it be removed just when he finds out that it no longer is in existence in the original place, even if he brought it to a place where it still was in existence? It hadn't ceased the Shvi's produce. Ela Amar Rav Ashi. But Rav Ashi said as follows, Beplugda Dahani Tanai, that this machloket is similar to another machloket of Tanaim, Ditznan, where it teaches as follows, Hakovesh Shlosha Kivashim Bechavit Echad, one who preserves 3 types of vegetable preserves in a single keg, in a single basket, right? Rabbi Elazar Omer Ochlin al Harishon. Rabbi Eliezer says it's permissible to eat, okay, until, so long as up to the point that the first of the 3 items is no longer available. Rabbi Yeshua Omer Afal Ha'acharon. And Rabbi Yeshua disagrees and says one can eat until the 3rd item is no longer available. Okay, why is that? It would seem that Rabbi Eliezer holds that when you preserve the 3 items together, that they each lose their own identity. And if that's the case, once you start eating, okay, and you finish, okay, so to speak, the first item, it's like they're all no longer available, and that's the end. Whereas Rabbi Yoshua holds, even when you preserve these 3 items together in the same container, that implies that at least they somewhat still have their own identity. So therefore, not till you finish the third item do you say that all of the items have been exhausted, cease to exist. Now, Rabban Gamliel Omer, Kol Shekala Mino Min Hasadeh, says Rabban Gamliel, anything that has ceased, excuse me, from its variety, from its kind, existing in the field, in other words, during Shvi'is, Yeva'er Mino Min Habayat. One must remove that variety, that kind of food, vegetable, whatever, from one's home. V'halacha kidvarav. And the law is like his statement. Okay? So that would be implication, therefore, that once again, it's no longer in existence in the field, and that animals can't get at it. The same way, the homeowner, so to speak, cannot feed that same item, let's say, to his domestic animals, nor can he use it. Okay. Now, Ravina Amar, says Ravina, Beplukta Dahani Tanai, regarding the argument between these Tanaim, Datnan, okay, again, it's like this one. Ochlin b'tmarim ad shichaleh ha'acharon shebetzor, where they say that it's permissible to eat tmarim, to eat dates, until the last one finishes up in the location of Tzoar. Apparently that was a major community producing dates. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, he says, as we turn over, right? Ochlin al shel ben hachifin. Okay? No, he says, one can eat the dates so long as they are still found between palm branches. In other words, even if the dates have fallen off the tree and they're still there in the branches, it's possible that animals can have access to those dates. Therefore, which should be able to have it in your home for yourself, for your animals. Ve'ein ochlin al shebein hashitzin. But it's not permitted if those dates fell among thorn bushes, because then the animals of the field, the wild animals, don't have access to it. And we said, according to what seemed to be in the pasuk, right, that therefore that would be prohibited. Okay, the Gemara now picks up and tells us the following. Okay, since we're talking about produce and we're talking about where is it that produce may be cease to be growing during Shvi'is or continue to be growing, it's going to give us an explanation of the fact that the inhabited areas of Eretz Yisrael vary from one place to another, and tell us about that. Okay, Tznan, we have a Mishnah that teaches there. In other words, it teaches in another section of the Gemara. Shalosh aratzot lebiur. There are three, I'll call it lands, but locations really, identified with what I'm going to call greater Eretz Yisrael, okay, regarding the issue of removing. Yehuda, okay, the area around Yehuda, in other words, Yerushalayim, that what we'll call for the moment the center. Ve'ever HaYarden, the other side of the Jordan, okay, which in other words really means the parts of the what we would call the West Bank, okay, and Jordan, the Galil, and the north, the Galilee. Okay, and now what we've designated these three areas, there are three sub-territories, I'll use that term, within each of those areas. V'shalosh aratzot b'chol echad ve'echad. And there are three, as I'm saying, sub-territories within each one. V'lama amru shlosha aratzot lebiur. And so why then does this Mishnah designate three locations for removal? Shehiyu ochlin bekol echad ve'achad ad sheyichle ha'acharon sheba, implying that one could eat certain produce in each one of them until that kind of produce is finished up in the last one of them. Mina hani mili. On what basis do we say this? Okay. Amar Rav Chama, says Rav Chama bar Ukva. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina. Amar Kra. Based on the following pasuk. Ulevehemtecha lechaya asher ba'artsecha. Okay, it is for your animal, in other words, your domestic animal, ulechaya, or for the non-domestic animals that are in your land. Kol zman shechaya ochelet min hasadeh. Okay, so long as the time is such that the non-domestic animal is able to eat it in the field, right? He'achel lebehema shebabayit. You can feed it to your domestic animal, okay, at home. Kala lechaya asher basadeh. If it ceased to be for the non-domestic animal in the field, kala levehemtecha min habayit. You must cease to feed it to your domestic animals. Ugemiri, and we learn from this, de'ain chaya shebeyehuda gedela al perot shebegalil. Namely, that the non-domestic, the wild animals that live in the area of Yehuda don't, let's say, survive, don't grow, okay? They don't flourish, okay, on the produce that grows in the Galil. Ve'ein chaya shebegalil gedela al perot shebeyehuda. And the wild, non-domestic animals that live in the north, in the Galil, don't survive, grow, flourish, so to speak, on the produce that grows in the Yehuda area. Now, given this statement, the Braita is going to tell us the following. Perot, if we have produce of Shavi'is, Shiatzu me'eretz Yisrael, l'chutz la'aretz. Okay, so we have produce from any one of these three locations, which we've called the Greater Israel, okay, land of Israel, okay, and it goes outside, namely to Bavel, for example, okay, right? Mitba'arin bechol makom shehem. One must remove them then from any place where they are found. Okay? Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, he says, claims, yachzeru lemekomam, that one must return that produce back to its place of origin. V'yit ba'aru mishum shene'amar, and then remove it, destroy it there, because the pasuk says, ba'artsecha, in your land. Gemara says, it responds, ha'afikte, but perhaps he's used some of that produce, right? Krei be ba'aretz. So therefore we say, why don't you simply say it must be destroyed in the land? Okay? Ba'artzecha. But the pasuk said, in your land. Inami me'asher ba'artzecha. Or perhaps we can understand it to also mean that which has come from your land. Now, we have an interesting story that comes to try to explain what happens in that situation. Rav Safra, Nafak me'eretz Yisrael, l'chutz la'eretz. Rav Safra traveled, right? He left the land of Israel to go outside the land of Israel. Hava bahade, okay? And he had along with him Garva de Chamra de Shvi'it. He had a keg of, let's call it beer or wine, right? Wine made from produce that was Shvi'is produce. Lavu Bahade, Rav Huna Bered the Rav Ika, the Rav Kahana. And he was accompanied on this trip, okay, by Rav Huna, the son of Rav Ika, as well as by Rav Kahana. Now, Amar Laho, and he said to them, Ika de Shamia le Mine de Rabbi Abahu. Is it any one of you, okay, who've heard what the psak, what the decision, the view of Rabbi Abahu is in regards to taking Shvi's produce outside of Eretz Yisrael, in regards to where it's destroyed or not? Okay, because notice we had the machloket just above, that Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel says it has to be returned, but the Braita, okay, was a stam Braita. Okay, so what happens? Okay, the following. Halacha ka Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar or no? Is the law like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar or not? Okay, now, Amar le Rav Kahana, Hachi Amar Rabbi Abahu. This is what Rabbi Abahu said, according to Rav Kahana, Halacha ka Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, that the law is like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, okay? Who basically said, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, he said, you've got to return it back, okay? Amar le Rav Huna Bered the Rav, okay? Ika, what did he say? Hachi Amar Rabbi Abahu. This is what Rabbi Abahu said. Ein halakha Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. That the law is not like Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. In other words, you don't have to return it in order to remove it. You could do it there. Okay. Now, what's the implication there? The implication would be, okay, the same thing might apply to chametz. That we could say, you don't have to return it, the wheat, whatever, but you could be mavatel it in your heart, so to speak, right? And right where you are, okay? That would seem to be the implication of the pasuk. Okay? Now, Amar Rav Safra, this is Rav Safra, Nekot haklala the Rav Huna biyadecha, okay? So Rav Safra decides whose answer is he going to take, right? That of Rav Kahana, okay? Or is he going to take the view of Rav Huna Bered Rav Ika? Okay? So he says, here, he says, Nakot, let's select, focus, choose, Ha-klala, this general statement of Rav Huna. Okay, that is here in your hand, that's available. The diek v'gamar shma'atata mipume de rabbe, because he is exact, okay, and in his learning, and he has learned and recites in very clear, okay, explicit memory and knowledge from the mouth of his teachers. Okay. Kirchava de Pompadita, as was said by Rechava in Pompadita. The Amara of Rechava, because Rechava was, so to speak, quoted almost as if he had said, Amar Rav Yehuda, says Rav Yehuda, Har Habayit, Stav Kaful Haya, okay, that on the Temple Mount, okay, the columns were double. Stav lifnim mistav. one column in front of another column. Okay, the implication was that Rav Huna was quoting Rav Yehuda directly, okay, because he used language, okay, that was dating back to earlier times as opposed to language that they used in contemporary times. Okay, that's based on the word stav. Okay, now, having cited that kind of language, it meant that he really was medayek. He was really exact in what his teacher told him. Now, Kari Ale Rav Yosef, okay, cited in regards to him the following: Ame ba'atzo yish'al, okay? In other words, citing this incident, okay, Rav Yosef was now going to make a comment, and his comment is going to refer to Rav Safra, actually. Ame ba'atzo yish'al, it's like the people will be asking, umaklo yagidlo, and his staff will tell him, kol hamekal lo magidlo. Whoever gives him the easier answer, that's who he, so to speak, listens to. So that was Rav Yosef's attitude about Rav Safra's having chosen the statement of Rav Huna over that of Rav Kahana.
Is he allowed to pick and choose an easier one? Is that permissible?
Well, remember what he said was basically, who knows what Rabbi Abahu decided? So one of them said Rabbi Abahu said X. The other said Rabbi Abahu said Y. And Rav Safra saying, well, I believe the person who said Y because his reputation as being exact in his studies is supported by other people as well. Right. So if he says so-and-so said Y, that's what must be the correct halacha. Mm. So it's not necessarily a question of accepting what's more lenient. It's the question of who is the better source of the authority. Okay?
Right.
But good question, Bob. Okay. Now, we come to another example in the text of the Gemara that's going to give us, I'm going to connect it to what we saw before. Right? Remember, it said earlier in the top of the Amud that the animals had to have access. The wild animals had to have access to these produce. And if it was in the palm branches, that was one thing. But if it was in the thorn bushes where they wouldn't have access, then that's considered, okay, a point that it as if it is ceased. Okay, so we now have the following statement. Rabbi Eli, what did Rabbi Eli do? Katz kafniata deshvi'it. Okay, that he cut down certain palm trees that had unripe dates on them, that these unripe dates were Shavuot dates. And in cutting down this palm tree, the Gemara then says, Hechi avid hachi. How is it possible that he did this? In other words, if we said earlier, okay, that so long as it's accessible, okay, even if they're off the palm, the dates had fallen, okay, but they were still in the trees, in the leaves, okay, how could he cut it down, especially during Shvis year? La'achla amar Rachmana. The Torah, however, said for the purpose of eating, v'lo lahefsed, and not for the purpose if one misses out on it, doesn't benefit from it, as a loss. V'chi tema, And if you want to say, Hani mili heche dekan nachet lepera, here we're talking about a situation where the fruit was already missing, so to speak, gone. Aval heche de lo nachet lepera, but where it's a situation where the fruit is no longer accessible, lo, then it wasn't right. V'ha'amar Rav Nachman bar Rabba bar Avuha. Okay, says Rav Nachman in the name of Rabba bar Avuha. Hani mitchile da'arla asire. Okay, but aren't these unripe dates, okay, still part of the issue of Orla? And therefore, wouldn't they still be forbidden? Il v'ne'asu shomer lepiri. Since we say that these leaves, okay, or stalks, okay, basically come to protect the fruit. Okay, so the Gemara says, "V'shomer lepiri emat hava be." Right? Is that the case? Can we really say that these stalks, okay, that are around the fruit protect them, and therefore that's the same as unripe fruit? Bekofre, okay, when we're talking then about the unripe fruit, v'ka kari laho piri, and yet we refer to them as fruit. Rav Nachman, says Rav Nachman, right? Or is that Rabban Gamliel? Right? Rav Nachman da Amar ke Rabbi Yossi. Rav Nachman says, according to Rabbi Yossi, Tatnan Rabbi Yossi says as follows: Smaradar, okay, grape buds, asur mipnei shehu piri. Those are forbidden because they are considered like the fruit. Plige rabbananale, but the rabbis disagreed with him. Matkifla Rav Shimi min Naharda'ah. And Rav Shimi from Nahardea challenged this. And he said, Umi plige rabbananale de Rabbi Yossi bashar ilanot. Do the rabbis also disagree with Rabbi Yossi in regards to other kinds of trees? Vahatanan. But isn't it taught elsewhere in a Mishnah? Mematai. Ein kotzitzin et ha'ilanot b'shvi'it. At what time do we say that it is not permitted to cut down trees during Shvi'it? Beit Shammai omrim kol ha'ilanot misheyotziu. Beit Shammai says it's all the trees, okay, from the time they start producing, I would say, right? Beit Hillel omrim, but Beit Hillel says hacharuvin misheyashrishu. Okay, well, if we're talking about carob trees, it's from the time that they start forming chains. In other words, you start seeing them grow together. V'hagfanim, and from vines, misheyagriu, from the time that they first start to form kernels. V'hazetim, misheyanitzu, and in vines of zaitim, of olives, when they start flowering. V'shar kol ha'ilanot misheyotziu, and the other trees from the time they start coming out, so they get blossoming. Okay? Just to continue a little bit more. Va'amar Rav Asi, who boser, says Rav Asi, that one refers to unripe grapes, vahu girua, and another refers to grape kernels. Hu pul halavan, that's like the white beans. So the Gemara asks basically, pul halavan salkada'atach, you're comparing kernels of grapes to white beans? Ela ema, but rather I would say, shi'uro kipul halavan, but rather say that the size of the grape kernel has to be the size of a white bean. Okay? And then the Gemara is going to pick up from there, and that's where we'll pick up tomorrow.
Rabbi Green, I thought we were never allowed to cut down a fruit tree. What happened here?
Good question. Okay. Not only that, but are you allowed to cut trees during Shvis, even if it's not a fruit tree? Wouldn't that be considered tircha that's not permitted during Shvis?
It's
So
not
you're
permitted
right,
in the first place.
right? So you're right,
Not-
Zev. So the question is, okay, if it's Orla, right, he's not supposed to benefit from it, right, for 3 years. Okay, so that's where the Gemara uses this as an opportunity, I think, to be able to clarify, okay, not only the question of Orla here, but as we go into it, more about other examples that are associated with Shvi'is and other examples as well. Okay,
You're giving me examples of what they say here, but I don't understand. I still don't understand. Believe the Torah clearly says, do not cut down a fruit tree. And they did cut them down. That would mean at any time of the year under any circumstances.
okay. Okay, it's a good question, and I'll have to give it some thought. Okay,
Okay.
all right,
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi.
all right.
Thank you
Everybody-
very much. Have a great day, everyone.
Take care.
Be
Great
well.
day, everyone.